Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Shepherd's Tech Lab. I am Santosh, and on this channel, we break down Salesforce topic from admin, developer, and architect perspective. A quick reminder: we publish videos every Saturday and Monday, so make sure you subscribe to this channel and stay connected. Here's what we cover today. What is Salesforce Big Object? Why Salesforce introduced big objects, the core characteristics of it. We will see a quick comparison between the big object and the custom object. Next, we will see the ideal scenarios where big objects should be used and where should not be used. Later, we will go through the architect level design consideration. And finally, we will go through the real world example along with the common mistakes and misconception. So, what is big object in Salesforce? A big object in Salesforce is a special type of object designed to store massive volume of data. A normal custom object is great for a day-to-day operational CRM data. Like user creates a record, then user edits the record, then we will have some automation on it, flows, triggers, then you will have a report on it. You can create some list views. But when you start talking about historical, archival, compliance, telemetry, or event like data, the volume becomes so large that your regular data model starts breaking down. Storage cost explodes. So, what I mean by data models start breaking down? Just because of the huge amount of data, storage cost explodes. Your reporting become heavy, indexing become expensive, query performance is going to degrades, data skew issue will start showing up. Data skew, if you don't know about data skew, you can revisit to our previous videos. We have explained the data skew. Then backups, sandboxes become slower. So Salesforce provide big objects as a storage layer meant for very large data, mostly read, rarely changed, and accessed by predictable query pattern. The key mindset is this: big objects are not designed to behave like a regular CRM objects. Big objects are designed to behave like a scalable, indexed archive inside a Salesforce. Why Salesforce introduced big object? Salesforce introduced So let's try to understand why Salesforce introduced big objects. Salesforce introduced these big objects to solve a very real enterprise level problem, that is long-term retention of high volume data while keeping the org performance intact. Many industries, especially finance, healthcare, insurance, telecom, and retail, have a compliance requirements where they need to retain data, let's say for 7 years, retain the audit history for 10 years. Now, here is the challenge. Keeping that much of data inside a standard custom object impact storage cost, performance, queries, reports, and data management operation. That's the reason Salesforce introduced the big object so that you can store the huge amount of data with the defined primary index and query patterns that can remain efficiently at scale. core characteristics of big object. Let's now cover what makes big object unique. These are the core characteristics of big object. Massive scale. Big objects are built for very large data set. You can consider tens of millions to billions of records. Primary index is mandatory. This is the biggest concept. For big object, you must define primary index. Basically, the fields that will be used to retrieve records efficiently. This means performance is great if you query using the index. Limited CRM feature. Big objects do not support the full set of Salesforce automation and UI capabilities like the standard and custom objects do. So don't expect that you will find a standard page layout like a regular custom or standard object. List views and reporting like normal object. Or let's say you can utilize all the automation tools just like trigger and flow the same way you are using for custom and standard object. Access patterns are different. Big objects are commonly accessed using bulk API, SOQL designed around index fields. In many cases, asynchronous or batch style retrieval is the pattern here. Next one is data usually append only. In real world usage, big objects are typically treated like insert once, read many times, delete rarely if ever required, update only in very specific controlled use cases. So the mental model is archive plus immutable history. Let's quickly go through the comparison between the big object and custom object so that you can have a clear idea when to use big objects. So usually I have seen in the project people make mistakes using big objects over a custom objects and they treat them just like the custom object. But there are a lot of limitations that we have when it comes to big objects. So it is necessary to understand the difference. Primary purpose. So custom objects are created for operational CRM data, where your big objects are used for historical and archival data only. Your day-to-day business transactions are for custom objects, and if you have a high volume storage and a long-term records, that's where you can use the big objects. So scalability wise, I think you might have known. Scalability wise, I think by now you know this that custom objects is low to medium volume where big objects are for millions record. UI support, big objects are very limited UI and custom objects support full standard UI. When it comes to Apex DML operation, custom objects are supported by the DML operation where for big objects, you need to use special APIs. Frequent updates can happen on the custom objects where big objects are append only. Performance at scale. Slow down at large scale and big objects are optimized for high volume. So cost impact. Higher cost at scale, more cost effective. And the complexity wise, custom objects are simple and straightforward, where big objects need a careful planning. When you should use big objects. Here are the best fit scenario when big objects are right choice. Compliance archival. When you must retain data for many years, like transaction, policy changes, audit trails, and communication history. If you are dealing with high volume event storage, that's when you can use the big objects for API request log, integration event stress, the system telemetry logs, and for tracking the user activity. You can also use the big objects for historical snapshot as well. So for example, daily balance snapshot for an account, end of the day, the positions in the finance, inventory snapshot per day in the retail. So in all these historical snapshot scenario, you can use the big object. Next one is reference only data. Data that is rarely changed but often retrieved for verification, like dispute investigations, historical customer interaction trails, and regulatory lookups. So for this kind of use case also, you can go for big objects. Last but not the least, when you are crossing the comfort zone of custom objects where you are dealing with humongous amount of data and you want your operational org remain fast, that's when you can go for the big object. So now you know when to use the big object. Let's try to understand when you should not be using one. So of course, for day-to-day CRM operation, you should be using custom objects or the standard object, not the big object. Highly dynamic data, then if you don't know the query pattern yet, you should definitely go for the custom object, not the big object. If you can't clearly answer what fields will be used to retrieve data most of the time, then you are not ready to use big object design. If you need rich relationship and rollups, big object is not the ideal solution. Architect level design consideration. Now let's think like an architect. Big objects are not create object and done. You must design them. So one of the first important point is primary index design is everything. Your index should match your most common retrieval pattern. Ask the question like, will user search history by an account, by a transaction ID, or they are going to search by date range, or they are going to use customer reference key. Then design the primary index accordingly. Because if your index is wrong, query become painful. You may need to redesign an object. Next is data lifecycle and retention strategy. So we should be defining what goes into Salesforce object and when it goes, what stays in the custom object, how long it will stay in the big object, when to archive, and how you purge. A common pattern is keep recent 6 to 12 months in custom object for operational use, move the older data to big object for retention. Third one, ingestion pattern. How will data enter the big object? Common ingestion pattern, schedule batch job, integration pipeline from external system, bulk API loads for historical migration. Architect decision, choose the approach based on volume, frequency, and failure handling. The fourth one is access and user experience, security and compliances. Big objects support permission set, but the sharing model is not same as standard object. Last one is monitoring and operability. At scale, you need to monitor for ingestion failures, monitor for query performance, alerting for index misuse, retry strategy for bulk load. Big objects are big, so your failure use cases are also big. Now let's try to understand a real world scenario. Imagine a bank or a financial institute using a Salesforce for customer onboarding, service request, account management, case management. And now the bank also need to store transaction history, ledger references, posting confirmations, dispute stresses, compliance and audit related details. But here is the challenge that we have. Salesforce is not the bank's core ledger. The core transaction happens in core banking systems. Salesforce need transaction visibility mainly for customer support, dispute, compliances, and relationship manager context. The problem is if bank tries to store every transaction in custom object, then it leads to slower performance, heavy data, reports become unusable. At the same time, as we have seen earlier, compliance says we must retain the transaction references for 7 to 10 years. We can create one custom object like transaction summary. This object stores the recent and operational transaction records, let's say for last 3 months or 6 months. And then we will create one big object, let's say transaction archival, and we will store that information in this object. We can have the archival process, let's say every night you will run a batch job which deletes the transaction 180 days and older from the transaction summary and insert it to transaction archive. The common mistakes and misconception. Big objects are just like custom objects with bigger storage. So I think so far you know that that's not the case. There are so many limitations that we have as compared to the custom object. The purpose is different. We can design index later. So that's not the case. You have to design your index. We run the normal reports on big objects. Big objects are not meant for reporting engine. We can use the triggers and flows as usual. That is not possible. Putting the live operational data into big objects. This usually backfires because operational data changes frequently and requires rich CRM feature. So in this video, we have learned so far about the big objects, then why Salesforce introduced them, and we know the difference between big objects and custom objects, and now we know where to use them and where to avoid it, and a real world example that we have seen. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to the Shepherd's Tech Lab. And just a reminder again, we publish a video every Saturday and Monday. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in next video. Thank you.